So either we make a difference in the controversy and hence we are actor of it, or we don't, and then we're just irrelevant. So what we do is just irrelevant. And I think it's better to be relevant. It actually took me a long time to come to define controversy and mapping itself. So even just deciding what controversy mapping is, what controversy and mapping is, took a lot of time. For a long time, I actually tried to just avoid the question or avoid answering the question. And I would say something like a controversy is anything you could study with controversy mapping. So if you can apply controversy mapping to it, then it's a controversy, which is a bit of an empty answer, of course. So in the book that we wrote with Anders Munk, we try to come up with a more specific definition, which again is not very precise. Controversies are still things people disagree about, or about which there is conflict and divergence in society. But we also added two extra criteria to define controversy, or at least the controversy that can be studied with the methods that we describe in the book. And the first one, it is that they have to do with science and technology. So they have to be connected to some scientific or technological object or theory or idea. And they have to be public. So they have to be in the public debate. Controversy mapping has three main objectives, I would say, or three main things it can offer to different type of audience that can use these methods. One is to open up what we call the black boxes of science and technologies. Science and technology, when they work, they tend to become black boxes. So we tend to forget what's inside them, and which is actually a very convenient thing, right? We don't want to, every time we use our phone or our computer, we don't want to be forced to sort of open up the black box and understand exactly what's going on inside. As long as it works, that's fine, right? But that creates some problem. It creates some epistemic problem, I would say. So if you are a researcher and you want to know what's happening inside science and technology because you wanna study it, then you have to do with this opacity of technoscience, which is something that is actually a bit difficult to go beyond. And controversy mapping and controversies, more generally, are the moments where these black boxes are pried open by the social actor themselves because they disagree about how the computer should work, or whether you should send data this way or that other way, because this way it can be encrypted, so better for privacy. This other way it might not be, etc., etc. So controversy appears, and because of this controversy, then suddenly we can look inside the black box of science and technology. Being able to study the inner workings of science and technology is the first thing that controversy mapping can offer. The second one is maybe then help design them a little bit better, right? Because now we can look at their insights. So that it becomes maybe an occasion to think of how we can redesign them differently. So maybe telephones or computer or whatever, whichever technology we're talking about, can actually be designed slightly different in a way that it might be maybe more efficient or more inclusive. And this second sort of design purpose also connects to the third one, which is the political goal of controversy mapping, which is precisely to reopen the public debate about controversy and to make it more, contribute to it, make it more lively, precisely by giving the possibility to rediscuss or to re-question, if you want, things that, because they now work and now have become sort of integrated in social life, no one discuss any longer. But thanks to these moments of controversy, we can reopen this discussion. So my suggestion, and the one that we give in the book with Anders, is to be very careful about which controversy you choose to map. So to choose a controversy subject that is commensurate to the research resources that you are. I mean, it is one thing if you are PhD students working on 3 years on your PhD or 4 years on your PhD subject. It is another thing if you are a group of master students and only having 1 semester to follow a controversy. It is a different thing if you are in, I don't know, a big European funded project the last 3 years and you have like maybe, 1 million euros to spend on on your mapping. So all this, the time that you have, the resources that you have should really guide you in choosing controversies that are larger or smaller. And generally, it's always better to choose smaller controversy. And of course, then you also have to work with what you have, right? So choosing local controversies that happens in your city or close to where you live, or maybe even in the department where you are, or in the university where you are based. That's always a good idea, because then you have a more direct access to those controversies. So a good example of a controversy that is small enough to be treatable, but also rich enough to open up our sort of world of social technical debate is one that has been chosen by a group of my students about rats in Paris. So, the debate whether there are too many rats in Paris and whether we should do something about that and what exactly. So it seems to be it is actually a very localized controversy. It starts in one city and it concerns, the sort of our coexistence with one species. But then it opens up a lot of different discussion about sort of what we consider wildlife. How do we work with sort of biodiversity? Biodiversity we will not necessarily be very happy about. And then, of course, because these species, rats, are very, very much in symbiosis with human beings, then it also opened up a lot of discussion about what sort of human life is in a city. Right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can study about how we live together, the kind of infrastructure that we share, and how we share that with other beings, not just us, the humans, that are suddenly come to the forefront because of this seemingly very small controversy. Another good example maybe there's a building in Geneva, the University of Geneva, which is supposed to be a smart building, that says that it handles itself the recycling of air and the temperature, and then users are not, so people in the building are not allowed to, they cannot even open the window, right? And they cannot crank up or down the temperature. The building does it itself, and that actually opened a lot of debate and discussion about whether this is a good idea or not. And I think is also a good controversy, because sort of behind this little example of living in a building or living with the building, in this case, then it opened up a huge discussion about how should we deal with, for example, environmental problem, right? Because this building is more effective than a normal building in terms of kind of the emission. It demands less emission to be warmed up or cooled down because it's smart. But then you lose the sort of individual freedom to adjust to yourself. So everyone has to sacrifice a little bit of its freedom in order to live in a more sort of harmonious way, but also one that is sort of top-down. So people are complaining a lot, and there is a lot of this bottom-up, top-down freedom versus the environment, which you would then also find in many other controversies, such as how we deal with climate change, that you just find in this tiny microcosm of one only building. Actor network theory is certainly the most important inspiration for controversy mapping. And actor network theory is many things, which I don't have the time to get into, but clearly the thing that people remember the most is the role of non-human actors. So this idea that social life is not only made by humans, but also made by all the non-human actors that interact or interfere with our own lives. So that can be technical objects, that can be scientific theory, but it can also be natural objects like animals, climate events, weather events, anything that in a way or another interacts or interfere with our own action. This idea of non-human actors being part of social life is very controversial in itself. So it is a huge controversy about actor network theory and about this specific idea. And I think the controversy can be avoided or vanishes if we consider actor network theory not so much as a theory of actors, but as a theory of action. Because if you think about actors, well, then it can be a little bit hard to swallow that a rat or a building or any piece of infrastructure is a social actor, because we're often used to attribute to social actors some features, such as, for example, inner life or language or intentionality, that of course we do not find in many of these non-human actors. But if we speak about action and social action or collective action, so action that interferes with one another, then it's much easier to see how a building acts, or our rat acts, or our computer acts, or our telephone acts, or our Facebook acts, because of course then action is not something that is specific to human beings. There are many other things that act. What is actually interesting in ethno theory is to focus on networks of action. So that's what we said. Rather than thinking about actors, think about action. And when you think about action, definitely you see that action is something, particularly collective action, to which many different type of entities participate. So we researchers clearly are actors in our maps and in our controversy. Or so there are two possibilities. So either we make a difference in the controversy, and hence we are actor of it, or we don't, and then we're just irrelevant. So what we do is just irrelevant. And I think it's better to be relevant and accept what, as we say in the book, which is a phrase that actually Anders found out, which I like very much. We're always complicit in one way or another. We have to accept that complicity. There's no way we can be relevant in a controversy, so have an effect in the controversy, have some consequence, and not transform the controversy in one way or another. That is something that we might not like as researcher. We might want to hope that we can be as neutral as possible, and sometimes we want to do so, but that's not always possible. It's actually never possible. So we have to accept this complicity and think about it, which is, by the way, I think is much better than just pretending that this is not the case, right? And that is actually not only true for controversy mapping, it's true for any form of mapping. Maps are instruments of power. So geographical maps, which we kind of look at when we do controversy mapping, we kind of aspire to this kind of power and the kind of beauty that they have, and we are not there at all. But it is definitely that maps has always been also instruments of power and instruments of war, right? So we prefer to remember the sort of the nautical history of geographical mapping. So maps as tools for navigating the world. But of course, even before that, maps were tools to colonize the world, to impose power. That's what the Romans used maps for. They used maps to colonize their empire, to build their empire. And that has been true for all types of colonization, and it's still true nowadays. And that is true for geographical mapping and for controversy mapping. Controversy mapping is also a very weird or very peculiar way of intervening politically, because it intervenes by showing and mapping out the complexity of the situation. So if you just want to intervene, if you are an activist, let's say, or a policymaker, and you just want to intervene in one debate, social debate, and sort of shift in one direction, there might be more efficient way to do so. Because in controversy mapping, because of the way this whole technique works, it forces you to first unfold the full complexity of the situation that you're studying, and then only after that maybe show how it can be simplified in ways that would be more inclusive, allow more diversity, be less asymmetrical in power, etc., etc. So in ways that can empower the people that are not in power yet. One other thing we should be worried and sort of careful about when we do controversy mapping is to give what Whitney Phillips calls oxygen of amplification, what we would call, even if the term is not perfect, but artificial controversy. So there are some controversy which are not, they're not born with social media, right? So Naomi Oreskes, for example, did very interesting work on her book, Merchants of Doubts about climate skepticism, and how this controversy about the existence of climate change or the link to human activities has been entertained as an artificial controversy for a long time. So basically everyone or almost everyone in the scientific community would agree about the existence of climate change and its human-made nature. But then some powerful, rich actor industrial lobbies, basically, then entertain the existence of some debate and controversy about it in order to slow down, very deliberately, in order to slow down political action and legal action on climate change. And so for those controversies, we should really be very attentive to the kind of attention that we bring to them, because by bringing them attention, we give them, again, what Whitney Phillips called oxygen of amplification. We let them to be amplified, or what we should maybe do is maybe just ignore them and dampen them. And that is also very, very much true for social media, right? So there are some political actors, for example, Donald Trump is a great example of this, were really great in using controversy to draw attention to themselves. So they would say things or do things that are very controversial, that would create outrage, but that in a way it's still people don't like them, but they still talk about them and make them on sort of important actors in the public debate. So and there's a strong connection between fake news or junk news. I'd rather say there's a strong connection between junk news and controversies. Junk news comes from this very hectic or ephemeral attention regime, right? Which is which has become the normal attention regime in digital media, because digital media are heavily rely on advertisement. And so basically we're in an economy of attention where it is very important to capture the attention of sort of online users so they can then be resold to advertisement. So this is not new, right? This is all, it existed, even advertisement existed long before digital media. So I'm not saying that it's a completely new thing, but it has been, I think, aggravated. And so controversies are a great way to capture attention. To some extent, that's why we also use them as a pedagogical tool. That's why we controversy mapping were first, as you might know, introduced by Bruno Latour, Michel Canon, and others, idea called the mean, to get their student interested in STS. So they would ask engineering students that would not be that interested in the sort of social aspect of science and technology to choose a controversy and to sort of map it out. That was a nice way of using it, but then of course it can be used for more, there's a dark side to the force of controversy, and they can be used as a clickbait, basically, right? So if you publish something that's about a controversy, it will, or particularly if that creates outrage, that would be a great way to capture the attention of your audience. So controversy mapping is especially the kind of controversy mapping that me and others present in the book, which might not be there, it's not the only type of controversy mapping out there, but the one type of controversy mapping that we do also heavily relies on digital methods, right? So we are all into using online debate data, and we really encourage our students to use those records from social media and from online discussion space. On the other hand, we also have to be very clear about the fact that these records often do not represent social debate or public debate in general. If you study Twitter, for example, which a lot of people do because it's easy, right? It's very easy to extract records from the Twitter API. Then you would, you would know what the debate is on Twitter, which is fine, which is interesting, but you have to be very careful not to conflate that with the public debate, right? That's the Twitter debate and the public debate are clearly not the same thing. Luckily, I would say, right? Because Twitter and a lot of, not just Twitter, but a lot of debate on social media is really toxic. And sometimes it's less toxic in other space. I wouldn't say in the real world, because there's not such a thing as a real world separated from the virtual world, but in other discussion space, there are the discussion place where debate is sort of richer, more healthy, more durable, etc., etc. So we should be very careful not to give too much importance to this space, and always, while we should look at them, also we should look at other debates. The way in which controversy mapping engage with sort of political debates and the way in which it contributes to societal debate is by unfolding the complexity of such debate, showing how complex they are and showing all viewpoints and all the arguments that are sort of mobilized by all these viewpoints. And so visualization then becomes a way to, if well handled, becomes a way to simplify a little bit, but without reducing, to make this complexity more legible. So it allows you to unfold a lot of complexity rather than just reduce or simplify it, but at the same time to make it legible for an audience or a public opinion that doesn't have that much time to dedicate to your own mapping. So that's what visualization is about, is being able to make things readable, which you can also do in text. But indeed, so visual languages work very well for that. And that's what we call controversy mapping, right? Rather than just controversy analysis. And we think that mapping in particular, in the sense of geographical mapping, among many other types of visualization, it's one that is really good to do one thing that is very important for controversy mapping, which is taking a different types, heterogeneous type of actors and action and showing them in one homogeneous space. So if you think about geographical maps, that is precisely what it does. You have one space, and then within this space, you can put elements, entities of very different types. You can put roads, you can put river, you can put mountains, you can put cities, you can put, a lot of, again, human and non-human entities that you can see on the same map, and you can commiserate, compare, contrast. You can see how they relate to each other. So ideally, that is what we want to do with controversy mapping. Also being able to find a space, a visual space, that is not necessarily a geographical one, but that has kind of the same capacity to project on one heterogeneous space many different types of action and actors. I think there are plenty of really interesting controversy going on in subcultural space online. So there's a lot of internet subcultures that we only basically care about when they make their way into the mainstream. Like think about QAnon, for example, right? That's a great example of something that's been brewing in 4chan. Everyone were basically ignoring that. And then suddenly we panic about the fact that 4chan gets to Facebook or YouTube, and that becomes a huge thing. And at that moment, it's a little bit too late to deal with it, and it's a little bit too late to understand what's going on. But there's a lot of interesting discussions. I was looking at a video by Sarah Z a few days ago about what she called the biggest online controversy, and which is the controversy about pro shipper and antis, so people that ships different character in fandoms together, so they put them together in some romantic relationship, and antis are people who are anti-shipping, so they're against the shipping, especially when it's problematic because this either the characters the same gender, or maybe some of them are underage, or many other reasons. That's a very interesting controversy, because it opens up very interesting discussion about freedom of speech and the way freedom of speech should or should not, and I clearly think it should, be limited by other rights and by other types of concerns. So that would be a nice controversy to map out.